I'm Charles Grodin. I was Miss Piggy's romantic interest in the Great Muppet Caper. I've also been on the Critic Show with Scott Murray, who's no Miss Piggy, believe me.
Disney Plus brings together fans of all ages. This podcast brings three adults who are also kids at heart together to talk about Disney Plus. Join Scott, the Magic Genie producer, Regina, the sassy Megara of the group, and Nathan, the gentle but grumpy Brit, as they bring you news, reviews, special guests, and discussions on the Disney Plus Streamcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for the Disney Plus Streamcast. I'm Scott Murray, and I'm here with Regina Davis.
Hello, hello.
I felt like I should have said this is our podcast starring everybody and me.
Yeah, you messed up. You really blew it.
I didn't want to come off self-centered, though, so I left that joke for, now, after I actually introduced you.
I appreciate the consideration.
So I did something on Twitter today that I never really do in general, much less on social media, but I was thinking about it, and I just went ahead and did it. You curious as to what that is?
Yes.
I finally decided, a lot of people have done this already, because it's such a big thing. I finally decided to take all of the Star Wars movies and rank them in my order, as far as best to worst. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that takes guts.
Would you like to hear the list?
Fearfully, yes.
Well, number one for me is always going to be Return of the Jedi. I can't imagine anything overtaking that. A lot of it has to do with being really the movie I remember seeing in the theater for the first time. I saw the other twos in the theater, but I don't remember it as well as this one. And I remember all my childlike reactions from that one. But I also just, in general, love Jedi. This will shock most people. Number 2 is actually A New Hope. Number 3 is Empire. Most people have Empire number 1, and I get it, but I'm not really one for the bad guys winning. And I think Empire is a phenomenal movie. I mean, I don't take anything away from people putting Empire first, but now that I've seen it 100,000 times, I find myself getting antsy on Dagobah. I'm just ready to get back into the asteroid field and things like that, because I already know how Luke's going to be trained. So the rewatchability is a little different for me on Empire. Number 4 is The Force Awakens. Number 5 is Solo. Number 6 is Rise of Skywalker. And I said that Rise of Skywalker could actually flip every once in a while with number 8, which is Rogue One, because I really liked Rogue One. Or I should say number 7, Rogue One. Number 8 is The Phantom Menace. Number 9 is Revenge of the Sith. Number 10 is The Last Jedi, and number 11 is Attack of the Clones.
See, you probably have Solo and Phantom Menace higher on your list than most people.
Maybe. I have friends who saw Solo 25 times in the movie theater.
Yeah, no, see, for me, I would have Solo in relatively the same placement as you. Phantom Menace would probably be a little bit lower. Mm-hmm. But my original trilogy is pretty similar. It would probably be A New Hope, Return of the Jedi, Empire. Okay. And Empire at the bottom of the list for the same reasons that you had. Mm-hmm. And then A New Hope is my number 1 for the same reasons that Return of the Jedi is for you.
I see. Yeah, and I would even say my last 2 might flip-flop.
Isn't that weird? Yeah. It just kind of depends.
My wife was curious as to why I picked certain things in certain orders. And I told her a big part of my basis for it is, if you gave me a choice between this movie and this movie, which would I rather watch? And whichever one I'd rather watch would rank higher. That's how I would.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's how I would kind of break the tie if I felt 2 movies could fit, one or the other, or one of the places. So that's the clear case of Solo and Rise of Skywalker. If you ask me out of those 2, which would I rather watch right now, I'd rather watch Solo.
I like that criteria. That's smart.
All right. Well, that is one of my big childhood passions, but we're not talking about it today. We're talking about the other one, which is the Muppets, and specifically the Jim Henson Muppet movies. I'm looking forward to today's discussion for obvious reasons, but it was just so good to go back and watch The Great Muppet Caper, which you want to talk about ranking them. I think I've always put Muppet Caper on top. And I love Muppet Movie and I love Manhattan, but I have always just had a special, connection to Caper. I think the story's better. The humor's just spot on. I like all of the music. So it just barely edges out Muppet Movie. But it's very close. We're going to talk about that today because you and Nathan had a chance to rewatch it too. We're also going to talk about, speaking of things happening on Twitter, something that happened recently was a big old discussion took place between who would win in a fight between the Muppets and the Sesame Street characters. And that became such a big thing on Twitter that even James Gunn put his 2 cents worth in. So,
man.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We also asked some people on Twitter to share what throwdowns they would like to see out of that fight. And at the end of the show, for those who are interested, we're going to replay my 2011 interview with Charles Grodin, which was all about his role on Muppet Caper. And it's a really, if you know Charles and you ever watched him go on things like Letterman or Johnny Carson, it was always, you just never knew what he was going to say and you never knew what he was going to come out with. And he actually talks a little bit about that in the interview. But he threw me off a little bit in this interview because this was like episode 7 of my first podcast ever called The Critic Show. And, he started talking about, beyond playing Miss Piggy's love interest or potential love interest. He talked about the actual affair he had with her off set. So as he kept going with that, I was just like, okay, what do I do with this? So it's a really fun interview, and it's just the type of thing that, he did when he went on shows and did interviews. So that's coming up a little later on in the show. But before we get started, I think we definitely need to talk about news, especially since I saw a Variety article about the Muppets and Disney Plus this past week. But I'm sure there was more to that. And in order to find out, we need to have our special segment with Nathan, which is called what, Regina?
It is called News with Nathan.
Hello, bonjour, guten tag, ciao. Keeping it continental for the opening this week because on March 24th, my dudes, Disney Plus launched in 7 markets in Europe.
Sure did.
UK, Ireland, Austria, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Switzerland. Between those 5 markets, my dudes, apparently 5 million downloads of the app. Don't know how that really converts to people watching, but I think the way they look at this is that people who watch online on their computers, it's kind of offset by people who might have multiple accounts. So a pretty healthy turnout for the first week or so. We like that. Obviously, people stuck at home, not a lot to do right now, and that's all right. People have gone and said about how thrilled they are to have that massive content available to them, because there is a lot, even if you don't watch all of it. There's a lot there for you to peruse though. And people back home in good old Blighty certainly have mentioned that they're pretty pleased that it's got such massive device support, and it also has 4K, HDR10, and Dolby Atmos and Vision support as well, which isn't always a given with streaming. So yeah, lots of folks digging that back home. Certainly my sister is an adopter back home, and she is loving it. So fair play. Obviously, Mandalorian is on there. 2 episodes to kind of, wet your palate a little bit if you're just coming to it, although I think the diehards might have already found a way to go ahead and stream that. Did you see that Bill Burr is confirmed to return for season 2, as well as Michael Biehn? He's getting his character on there. And I love me some Hicks, so I'm just so stoked that he's going to be in it.
Giddy.
Michael Biehn has such range. It's amazing to think those science fiction movies he did, and yet, he was also Johnny Ringo in Tombstone.
Yeah.
He'll be someone's Huckleberry, or you can be his. I don't know. I don't remember the line. But
he wants your blood. He wants your souls, and he wants them right now.
I you've just made my night. That's fantastic.
For real, we can end the show right here.
I love it. That's great. And in other sort of Mandalorian teaser news, maybe not. People were kind of a little bit giddy about the Ahsoka casting, of course, and people have sort of kind of got into the casting recently for these two dudes. One coming back, one new to the series, but also, if you go on Dave Filoni's Twitter, he's got new banner art. He never posts on his Twitter. It's barren. There's nothing on there at all, hardly. But on his banner art, there's some. It looks like concept art. It looks like a drawing of Rex.
Yep.
Everyone's favorite clone trooper, and so the speculation is, oh my gosh, is he going to appear in the Mandalorian? I don't know, but Rex he's awesome in Clone Wars. He's awesome in Rebels. I mean, they retconned him into Return of the Jedi as well, right? And that dude with a beard was awesome in that. So, the second you saw of him running around. It's also kind of got people talking about the Cassian Andor series that's coming out. They had interviews with a bunch of the people making that as a result, I guess, of Rise of the Skywalker coming out as part of the launch junket for that. One of the guys doing the practical effects on it, Neil Scanlon, he's done for the effects for a bunch of, the 3 movies that Disney have done with Lucasfilm. And they interviewed him about working on the Cassian Andor series. And he said, what's fun about this is, in many ways, I don't feel it feels different than working on a movie. It certainly doesn't feel like we are making any compromises. It's the same creative conditions in every department to do what we can do. We also have this backlog of characters. A lot of the characters that we built for all the films didn't make it to the final cut because that's just the way the film process happens. Or they're seen so momentarily that there's this wonderful second opportunity to bring back some of the characters we've made and bring them to this new storyline in a more, shall we say, integrated way. It's going to be tremendous. I find that it's a second opportunity for everything that we've made, plus the opportunity of moving TV along, in a sense, at what will not be at all diminished as far as the level of quality with the level of things that we are going to try and achieve, which probably ought to get you a bit excited for that show. Tony Gilroy, who did, I guess, the rescue project on Rogue One, script doctor and editor, he's coming back as part of the creative team, and the showrunner, Stephen Schiff from The Americans. So, again, we're quite optimistic about that, I think.
Yeah.
You have to think that we'll see a little more of Mon Mothma, and maybe even Jimmy Smits can do more than just step into a shot and look serious.
Talking about turning up for a paycheck, quick segue. A little while ago, we talked about Prince Harry having a chat with Bob Iger at a movie premiere saying, hey, my missus, she does voiceover work, right? Well, wouldn't you know, this week there's a Disney Plus documentary releasing called Elephant, and who's doing the voiceover? You'll never guess. It's Meghan Markle. She's got the gig, and it's about an African elephant and her son as they're heard make a journey across the Kalahari. It's done by Disney Nature, and I guess they have a couple of things coming out that week because there's a documentary called Dolphin Reef, narrated by Natalie Portman, that's also coming out as well. I guess it's following a particular dolphin in the Pacific and takes them around like the coral reef where, I don't know, was it a pack, a herd, a shoal, a plethora of dolphins, all the dolphins together. They're all hanging out, and it follows this one particular dolphin as he, she, they reach maturity. I don't know how you tell that with a dolphin, but, okay. If you are jonesing for some Disney merch and you can't get to the parks because they're closed for the foreseeable future, at least through April 18th, if not longer, I was doing the rounds for the merch, see what was cool, what was coming out. While we're talking about Stormtroopers earlier, or Clone Troopers, The Force Unleashed has a Black Series figure coming out exclusive to GameStop. It's up for pre-order right now, $25, and it's the Stormtrooper commander from those games. So you've got this like Stormtrooper armor, like the regular Stormtrooper armor that you're used to from the original trilogy, except it's got like these blue decals over it and looks kind of weathered. Looks pretty cool. It's a really nice sculpt. $25 for that one. And if you've got more of a Disney bent going on, in the latest in their limited edition 17-inch dolls that they're doing. These things kind of, I guess, are comparable to the Spotlight Barbie dolls that come out, like the collector's edition. Disney have released, ahead of the movie for obvious reasons, their Mulan limited edition doll based on the live action. Again, stands 17 inches, comes with sword, armor, really nice like fabric vestments, as well as there's a phoenix, which I haven't sort of tried to delve too much into spoilers, but there's a phoenix that mounts on Mulan's arm that has all these sort of, I guess, organza plumes coming off there, this rainbow-colored phoenix. Anyway, it looks really, really cool. Limited to 3,400, $130, and it is yours, shipped to your door. And guys, that's what I've got this week.
That sounds like a beautiful figure. Oh, gosh.
It's a pretty cool sculpt for what it is.
Yeah,
but
good news all around.
Think Hot Toys. Think more Barbie. Think like Barbie for grown-ups, and you'll be in the right sort of ballpark for that.
So as I mentioned, just in time for us getting ready to watch Muppet Caper again, I saw a Variety article this past week as well, talking about something we've already talked about on this show with Brian J. Jones, in fact, as to why we're not seeing things like The Muppet Show on Disney+. And it was a pretty extensive article. In fact, Brian's interviewed in that. And the gist of it, the main takeaway seemed to be, outside of just Disney trying to figure out what to do with them on and off throughout the years, as they changed leadership, it just kind of sounds like Bob Iger just wasn't a priority for him. He wasn't nearly as passionate about that franchise as some of the others. But the thinking is, the new guy might feel quite differently about that. So, it'll be interesting. I think really it's going to have to be one of these things. On top of that, it's just going to have to be in demand. I think it's good that Variety wrote something about it. Because that's just something that needs to be on Disney+. I mean, it not only because it's just good old-fashioned family entertainment, but there's people, I mean, just amazing, classic people, actors and musicians and performers that some generations don't even know who they are. And
that's exactly what I was about to say. Like, there's tons of people that this is maybe their first exposure to this kind of thing. Yeah. So for it to be put on this platform just seems like the right thing to do.
So, it was interesting what you were saying, Scott, because about Bob Chapek wanting to use, I guess, the Muppets maybe more because he's been overseeing the parks, such as their bit going to Epcot now. Referring back to the sort of news that we've done like last week, being that Disney's had to close up shop in a lot of places and had to have this massive debt offering in order to kind of generate new content and keep everything going, it would just make sense, wouldn't it? If you're the new guy coming in and you're looking to right the ship, you want to use every bit of intellectual property that you have, all of it. And so, like you said, Chapek, probably the guy to see that, to kind of get that resurgence going, because he's got to make these things make money for him,
Yeah, well, with that in mind, the rest of this show is pretty much dedicated to the Muppets. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about this whole discussion that took place on social media about what would happen in a fight. Talk about family entertainment, a battle between Sesame Street characters and Muppet characters, and then we're going to discuss our rewatch of The Great Muppet Caper.
That's next on the Disney Plus Streamcast.
Twitter a few days ago had someone just randomly post a question asking people to vote on who would win in a street fight between the Muppets and the Sesame Street characters. And from what I understand, it was, I think when I looked at it, it was pretty close. It was like the Muppets, I think, had it like 50-something to 40-something. And then everybody started to put their 2 cents worth into how that was going. And that included James Gunn, who was really kind of frustrated at the fact that the Sesame Street characters were not doing better than they were. In fact, he wrote, WTF, too many people are voting Muppets and forgetting what a natural-born killer Snuffleupagus is.
I mean, I gotta say, I'm a little worried about the Sesame Street gang in all this.
He goes, yes, I know Animal and Piggy are hardcore, but are they Oscar and Cookie tough? No, absolutely not. Don't F this up, Twitter. So, I'm not the only passionate person when it comes to these sorts of things. I mean, this was serious voting business. Forget this year's election. This is what really people were interested in. And I was trying to pull some opinions and some things from people on Twitter to find out not only what they thought, but also to share with us some ideas for fights, if you individualize some of those throwdowns. And I actually tweeted Brian J. Jones and said, what do you think about this? And Brian said, don't sleep on New Zealand and his boomerang fish. It's like, that's true. That's almost like a Mortal Kombat ability or a MMO ability that would be kind of nice to have. Anytime you can throw some. Also saw somebody reply back to us today at Verbose Borbage, said, the chef is insane and has so many random implements of death in his kitchen. Crazy Harry loves using explosives. Bunson's inventions sometimes border on criminal mastermind level. The Muppets would have this.
I mean, that's kind of what I'm leaning towards.
What I pointed out was, and this is interesting because Nathan told us off air last week that he watched the Jason Segel Muppet movie for the very first time last week. And if you remember, Nathan, we want to talk about fighting. There is a scene in that movie where New Zealand, Beaker, and the chef basically get in ninja outfits and throw down in order to kidnap Jack Black.
Yeah, they do. They abduct him, straight up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I thought of that immediately because probably, that's probably the most recent example. But here's some people that we heard from. We heard from Jedi Geek Girl, who said, I would like to submit a tag team match featuring Bert and Ernie versus Kermit and Miss Piggy. I feel while Miss Piggy automatically has an advantage to carry her team to victory, Bert to me seems like he has something boiling under the surface that would shock audiences.
I feel the same way about Julia from Sesame Street. Her smile is a little bit too placid. Freaks me out.
I actually joked, took it a completely different direction as far as a competition. I didn't make it a fight as much as I did like some sort of reality show. And I had it like Fozzie versus Bert's brother Bart. Do you remember Bert's brother Bart? The reason why is they both tell jokes and they both laugh at their own jokes. You have Fozzie, whose laugh is more like, saying waka waka all over. It sounds a little bit like Bert, obviously, for a reason. And then you had Bert's brother Bart, whose laugh was wah, 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 wah. Anyway, Justin Cavender said, Miss Piggy versus Oscar the Grouch in a back alley match. No rules, no refs, no holes barred. Or the Hecklers, Statler and Waldorf, versus Bert and Ernie in a tag team opera house match. Canes and rubber duckies are both allowed and encouraged. So who wins that one? Let's see, Miss Piggy versus Oscar the Grouch. I think Miss Piggy would win that because I think she'd smack him upside the head a couple of times and Oscar would just get disgruntled and grouchy and walk away.
Maybe, but I feel like Oscar the Grouch also would just deliberately touch something that's too disgusting and then Miss Piggy wouldn't even want to engage. Or he could just beat her in the face with the top of his trash can lid. I mean, I don't know. I really think Oscar takes that one.
Yeah, maybe keep it hardcore rules and hit her upside the head with the old trash can. I think it depends on whether or not she gets her flying karate chop in first.
Yeah.
If she gets that high in straight away, then again, see, these are the things that need to be discussed.
That's true because it may be wrong to assume that Oscar would ever leave the trash can. You think about
he's literally got armor.
He does. As you think about some of those fights you have in like video games when they're able to put up shields or they're able to get behind something, like when Piggy charges him, he could just, go underneath and then when she backs off, he pops up and throws something at her, like Regina said.
Mm-hmm, like a trash can lid.
And you know how Miss Piggy is about her looks. You throw some sort of nasty thing that gunks up her outfit.
That's what I'm saying. He's got like AoE attacks with all of his like gross stuff.
AoE and maybe a little bit of DOT attacks as well, possibly, depending what's in that stuff, whether it's sinking through things. Statler and Waldorf versus Bert and Ernie. I think the problem we have there, it would be amusing because if Statler and Waldorf could gain an upper hand, they would be just heckling and they would be taunting you the whole way. They would have the upper hand
because we know that they're in an opera house, so they've got a home court advantage. But they would also have the high ground because we know that they're going to be up in their little booth.
Yeah.
So I feel like they could just rain down whatever heavy objects they can find up there.
Right. And you don't even know that Ernie would make it out the bathtub. He just might be backstage just doing his thing where the others are all assembled up front, I mean, the allure of a rubber ducky, you just can't, you can't knock it.
So, Regina, Jeff McGee also weighed in on this.
Dang it. Here we go. Okay.
So here you go.
So who does he want Sam the Eagle to fight?
He, too, just kind of like I did, decided to put a little bit different spin on things. He says Miss Piggy versus Camilla, Bunsen versus Beaker, Statler versus Waldorf, and Fozzie versus Gonzo in a Yo Mama battle. I mean, if that's what it is, I think Miss Piggy wins the Yo Mama battle against Camilla.
Mm-hmm. I think so, too. Just for brutality reasons.
I think Beaker probably beats Bunsen. Bunsen's probably out of his league, doesn't even know what a Yo Mama battle is.
Yeah.
Man, Statler and Waldorf, those two guys probably know plenty.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be like last word standing. Fozzie versus Gonzo. I'd say Gonzo. I'd
say Gonzo, too.
I think Fozzie would run out of jokes and Gonzo would just come up with the most whacked out version of a Yo Mama joke he could over and over and over again.
Yeah, Gonzo doesn't care. Gonzo has nothing to lose. Gonzo will ruin your life.
Yes. And then he goes, "Can we do it again?"
Yeah.
He does it like 2 or 3 times in Muppet Caper. Can we do that again?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure plummeting is something you can only try once.
Yes.
All I would say is that for a stand-up comic, I think Fozzie has surprisingly thin skin. He's able to lose his confidence if he doesn't feel he's being appreciated, and I think just the relentless and say the energy from Gonzo is enough to throw him in a tailspin. So, I'm going to say Gonzo all the way for that. I'm going to push all the others. I think Statler and Waldorf probably just join in on each other, finish each other's lines. They've been together so long, be laughing at each other's burns on themselves.
That's true. It may not even be a battle. They'd just be laughing at each other's insults. That's a good point. One that I think would just be hilarious to see, just because you think about the noises each one makes. How about the two-headed monster from Sesame Street taking on Beaker?
Oh, man.
I mean, it would just be a bunch of meep, 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 and a bunch of...
God, what a nightmare. Oh, jeez. I'd like to see the Count go against anyone, because I feel like he's probably, of the Sesame Street gang, one of the more powerful.
Like the Count versus Uncle Deadly, like masters of eldritch evil.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
In fact, if those two just teamed up, they just take on the whole roster, no problem.
Right? It'd be like a Doctor Strange movie. And I'd see Animal against anything because he chews through metal bars, for God's sakes. Like, he's literally just going to eat you.
But so does Cookie Monster if he thinks it's a cookie. Like, you see him chow down on all sorts of things,
Yeah, someone steps in the way of that cookie addiction. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Gosh, and I don't know. I couldn't think of anybody. This is the thing. This is what made it so difficult at times. I could think of instances where I'd seen, Piggy or, people from the 2011 movie actually have scenes that resemble fight scenes. And I couldn't think of, and even somebody who has a pretty good Sesame Street memory, I couldn't think of very many instances in Sesame Street where I could go, oh, there was that one fight scene in Sesame Street that seems to fit, where I could see them match up against this person. So, I mean, in a way, that almost gives Sesame Street some advantages, though, because they may have, as some of our listeners were pointing out, and just as we were just talking about, there's probably some dark sides there that we may not even know about.
Yep. Although I will say, I don't need to see Mr. Snuffleupagus go up against anybody, because I don't need to see anybody do him any harm ever with his little eyelashes.
I always think if Snuffleupagus could shoot something out of his schnoz and just knock people over.
Peanut shells or something.
Yeah.
So it's the back lot of the movie set, and everyone's scrapping. They're having a big old ruckus. It's a Pier 9 brawl. It's a Donnybrook. There's a malfunction at the junction. And then all of a sudden, cars pull up, and there's a hush, and the Fraggles get out. Who do they fight with? Who do the Fraggles throw down with? Or do they just go run and sort of mop up what's left over and just kind of claim the crown?
I feel like they'd probably, the right thing to do, because I feel like they're the weaker team, would be to side with Sesame Street Gang. But at the same time, I feel like they're just in it for a really good fight. So I feel like they'd join up with the Muppets, you know?
What about you, Scott? You a Fraggle Rock fan back in the day?
I was not. I watched it on occasion. That's a weird show. Although I do remember the theme song. The theme song is an earworm. I always liked the Dozers. Is that what they were called?
The Dozers, yeah.
Dozers. Maybe
they're cool.
Maybe they could fight some of the little guys from Sesame Street. There was these little doodle bugs that Bert and Ernie had living on their windowsill. They could fight with the Dozers. Should we have Oscar fight the trash heap?
Ooh.
Well, I think what might happen there is that, the Fraggles run into the scene, and then, everyone's like, oh, Fraggles, kind of tiny and kind of wimpy, and no one's scared of Red or any of those guys. But then the Gorgs follow behind.
Oh, God.
And they're like, look, Ma, I got a Fraggle. And it's going to stampede the whole place, and end of scene, just wreckage
and then,
carnage left.
When we thought there hadn't been enough bloodshed, the banana splits roll in just to finish everybody off, because they're not joining up with anybody.
Gosh, so yeah, when you start getting the big guys involved, I mean, both
yeah,
Sesame
they just start
Street,
punting these little guys across. Yeah,
Sesame Street and Muppets had some big guys. You had, of course, Sweetums and a couple of the big guys on the Muppet side, and then you had Bruno, who looked like a pretty big guy who'd carry Oscar around. He could probably hang in there in a fight with the bigger guys.
I don't know, man. Until you get a drumstick jammed in your eye, there's only so much you can do. You can get garroted with a guitar string. I don't know, man.
Well, considering that Disney owns Marvel, they could probably produce something like this and just have a big epic, either Infinity War style battle or maybe a Civil War style battle between some of the main characters of the Muppets and Sesame Street, and just traumatize generations for years.
That would be so sick.
Yeah, the Muppet Registration Act. I'm about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty great. I mean, I think if anything, that should be a sign that people still love these characters, because they're willing to get into a pretty passionate battle with some pretty big names about who would win a fight between these two groups. So I loved how that just came out of nowhere, and saw how everybody was voting and discussing that. Before we move on, any other thoughts or any other battles you guys had in mind?
No, I think I've imagined an appropriate amount of bloodshed for one night.
Okay. All right, well, then we'll go back to PG/G-rated Muppets and talk about our rewatch of The Great Muppet Caper. Some of the things that I wanted to go over with you guys quickly was the music, the cast, and cameos. And then, of course, the story, and then some of the fantastic humor from the story. I want to start off with the music, because I think this is really relevant, considering how many times we've talked in this program about our feelings about musical numbers, and how 9 times out of 10 they just aren't a thing for us. Obviously, as a kid, it didn't bother me as much, because a lot of kids programming back then, especially, had musical numbers in it and didn't faze you like it does as an adult sometimes. But I've always liked the Muppet movie, especially the Jim Henson ones, the music numbers and the songs. There's a couple of them that I'm not wild about, but in general, I like them all. And the thing that really strikes me, I was thinking about this, because as I was getting ready to talk about this with you all today, and keeping that in mind that we've had those discussions about other types of movies, animated, real life action, why can I still watch this? Because remember, there was that moment where I talked about Pete's Dragon, and how I was just enamored with that movie as a kid, but it was hard to watch as an adult because of the singing at times. But I'm watching Muppet Caper again, and it never throws me. And I think a lot of that is just a testament to just the quality of entertainment that Jim and his team and those performers were able to do. Their ingenious imaginations and their dedication to bring things to life. I mean, that's the other thing that struck me. This movie was made in 1981, and they make these Muppets look like they're living amongst people. And it's just incredible what they pull off. And the music numbers, I think a big part of it in this movie is it just fits. It never seems to jar the story. It never seems to be pointless. You never go, well, that was random. Every time they break out into song, it fits. It works. You especially think about the numbers when they go to the Dubonnet Club. 2 big musical numbers there, and they just work. You know, they're in a freaking supper club, and they're breaking out into song. It just works. Before we get into some of the songs, I mean, what did you all think? We've had those discussions where, you know, it doesn't always work for us, but does it work for you in this setting?
So I don't entirely agree.
Okay.
It still kind of jars me, just because musical numbers usually do. They pretty much always feel out of place for me. But these don't offend me in the way that some other musical numbers do. Because like you said, Jim Henson and this entire team, you know, behind all of these movies, they do such a magnificent job putting on a show and making it such a spectacle that it's not like I felt whenever I was watching the live action Aladdin and Jasmine is just, you know, walking away and starting to sing while everybody else in the room is just kind of pretending like that's not happening.
Right.
I never felt that disconnection, and I never have with any of the Muppet movies. But at the same time, sometimes I can feel like they can go on a little bit long, or why is this happening? And then I'm like, it's a Muppet movie, Regina, don't worry about it. And so, you know, it jars me the same way, but I absolutely don't mind it because they're so well done.
Yeah, there's a quality aspect to the songs in this one, and let me just preface this by saying I don't really enjoy them that much because it does feel like something a bit Broadway, and that's just not my bag.
And they just kind of keep going sometimes.
They do. They kind of have that reprise thing going on for them as well in some cases, and I'm like, whoa, this is kind of tedious. That's just a knock on my. That's not a knock on the quality of that. It's more to do with my own sensibilities. Give you some backstory about the guy who did the songs of this movie. Joe Raposo, friend of Frank Sinatra's, renowned for his talent at the piano. Sinatra recorded a few of his songs, would call him the genius, just was known to be just one of the great American songwriters and even performers as well. He wrote the Sesame Street theme. He did C is for Cookie. He did Sing. He did It's Not Easy Being Green. He wrote all those songs. So there are songs in his repertoire that, again, you said earlier on, Scott, like earworms. Like, we know these songs, so I'm not knocking the songs. I'm not knocking the arrangements or anything like that. If you like Broadway productions, you are going to love the songs on this. You are going to say that everything is just the way it should be. It is everything that I would expect from a top-tier musical. And, you know, they do kind of advance not necessarily the plot, but the characterization. They're very Muppet-sounding songs, but still quality. And that's my takeaway from that, is that, you know, you totally get Miss Piggy in her songs. You know, you get Kermit, and they don't feel like they're just kind of shoved in there. They feel very specific.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a big flag waving Broadway person, but and you know, of course, a big part of this too could just be the nostalgia aspect. But like I said, there's things that I loved as a kid that kind of disconnect from me now. But I still love these songs. I especially love the Happiness Hotel song because it's so funny. The lyrics are hilarious. And then when they break away and they've got that part where, like, for example, Kermit asks Floyd, you know, so you guys live here? And he's like, oh yeah, but only between gigs, which means we've been here, 5 years?
Yeah.
So, I love the Happiness Hotel song. Hey, a Movie, which they open and close with, is a nice little song. Stepping Out with the Star, which is the one that they're singing before as Kermit's getting ready to go out with Lady Holiday, or Miss Piggy, I guess. One of the cool things I noticed about that are just some of the other little creative details, like the moment where, as opposed to just them dancing around and stuff, you know, they're in a room. There's only so much you can do in this room. Clearly, he's just getting ready to go on a date. But I like how they came up with the idea where you have that one shot where Kermit is singing and then his shadow is behind him, and then he stops and the shadow does its own bit. I just love creativity like that. You know, that's something that didn't even have to be there. That took some thought. Couldn't We Ride, which is the song that they're singing when they're riding bikes. And I just remember how that just blew everybody away. People still talk about how incredible it is that it looks like they're riding these bikes. You know, and we saw Kermit riding a bike in Muppet Movie, and it was just like jaw-dropping. It's like, how do they do that? I encourage people to go check out online a breakdown of how they did it. It's really quite simple. It was kind of like a marionette guy basically floating above them, like in Kermit's case. In Muppet Movie, and you know, he's just controlling it from above, and then when Kermit needed to speak or say something, they just shoot it close up. The first time it happens in Piggy's Fantasy, the 2 songs they do at the dinner club are pretty good. I remember people just losing it when they were all singing underwater.
Yeah.
You know, with Miss Piggy. And then Nightlife. I love Nightlife, which is basically that song that they're playing anytime they're driving the double-decker bus, and the Dr. Teeth and Electric Mayhem are just playing that tune. It happens twice. That, to me, is an earworm. I've always remembered that song. And I remember as a kid when they were speeding towards the Mallory Gallery playing that song, it just kind of got me jazzed as a kid because I knew the good guys were coming to foil the bad guys, and it almost had like their own theme with it. One of the things that the movies are known for, especially the Jim Henson ones, were the cameos. And this movie, very much like Muppet Movie, had a couple of people that had starring roles, and then a lot of just really notable cameos. We obviously had Charles Grodin, who played Nicky, and one of the things I love about that was Lady Holiday refers to him as a irresponsible parasite. Nicky actually has that written on his door. Irresponsible parasite. And then Lady Holiday is played by Diana Rigg, or Dame Diana Rigg, who also played a Bond girl. She was recently in Game of Thrones.
Olenna Tyrell.
Yeah. She's got some clout. We had Robert Morley. We had the great John Cleese and Joan Sanderson together.
God, I love John Cleese so much.
I do too.
Him playing as Neville,
yes, it
always strikes me as kind of a gentler, more relaxed Basil Fawlty.
Yes. It's so funny because, well, first off, it's funny that they're actually on a street called Highbrow Street. I just love the whole nonchalantness of, you know, what's that outside? It's a pig climbing up the side of the house. Oh, okay. And then they go back to their discussion.
In fact, anything I can do for you?
Yes. He was just a pig, was just here with a lizard. Sir Peter Unisoff. He's the guy that you recognize him almost immediately when he's talking to Miss Piggy, and she throws him out of the truck. When she throws him out of the truck, he lands into another cameo by Oscar the Grouch, who says he's there because it's a very brief cameo.
Me too.
Me too. Jack Warden, Peter Falk, who was even uncredited in this, and he has that scene where he sits there and makes up that long story to Kermit, and he's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I mean, that's a pretty stellar group of people, especially when you think of people like, you know, like we just mentioned, who are some pretty big names who have some just killer backgrounds even then, that agreed to come on and just make an appearance.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm happy anytime I see John Cleese. Joan Sanderson really unsettles me as a person, but her sort of just passive hatefulness as Dorcas really is perfect for me. I enjoyed Tommy Godfrey. I enjoyed Michael Robbins. Cameos can be done incorrectly, I think, and especially when you have as many as the Muppet movies usually do, it can sort of seem like, here's a scene, here's a cameo, here's a scene, here's a cameo. But they're all so well threaded in that I don't feel jarred by it. Tommy Godfrey played the bus conductor. Michael Robbins, he plays Henderson, but I actually learned later that he was also a security guard, and I never noticed that he played both roles. And that happens a lot with the cameos. They'll pop up somewhere else, and you don't realize it.
And he hates pepperoni.
He hates pepperoni.
What about you, Nathan? Did you see this growing up? I mean, it takes place right in your own backyard.
Yeah, it didn't really ring a bell, to tell you the truth. I did recognize a lot of the cameo people. They'd all had a pretty, I guess, storied career in British cinema and British TV. I talked about Michael Robbins. He was there's a sitcom I used to love when I was a kid, and it was repeats. It wasn't around. They weren't making it whenever I was a boy. It's from the 60s, one called On the Buses, about two kind of knavish bus drivers, or bus driver and bus conductor. The guy would sell the tickets at the time, and he played a relation to the main character, the main protagonist, and he was like super grumpy and moody all the time. Kind of had the Archie Bunker kind of thing going for him, and he's just really, really funny in that. So I loved seeing him there. Joan Sanderson, again, Fawlty Towers, but also there was a sitcom she was in called Me and My Girl back in the day, which in the 80s was absolutely stellar. She played the mother-in-law in that show and was awesome. John Cleese, of course, John Cleese, and he's a West Country boy as well. He's from Weston-super-Mare, just up the road from where I'm from. It's a little beach town, and he went to Bristol Grammar School, the arch rival of my school that I went to. So that's always nice to see someone from the West Country do well. The thing that I really liked about it, though, was, like when they go to the club and you've got Jim Henson there sitting there with Amy Van Gelder. She's actually credited in that movie as, I guess, the Muppet Doctor, because she had to fix up the Fozzie puppet that got burned on the set. She was a part of the Henson production team before that anyway, and she's still with Henson / Disney now, and she does a lot of work, I think, integrating their IP into what is now Walt Disney Productions and the parks as it is. She's one of the stewards of the characters and does a lot of work behind the scenes there. And you just see the smile on her face. I mean, she's not an actress, but you see her smile so broadly whenever they're being approached at the table for the picture, and it seems like it's so genuine. Like it's not just done for the movie. Like she's actually having a blast being there. Like she's so tickled to be there sitting next to Jim Henson as part of this great big production. So that's awesome too. Frank Oz being back in the Chronicle offices as well. Before there's that awesome scene whenever you get to see a picture of Kermit and Fozzie's dad, and so just because of the Muppet throwbacks in there, I really like it for that. But yeah, I guess being that so much of it was shot over there, and they had that connection to we said off air before, Lord Lou Grade, who in part gave his name to New Zealand. Who was a big financier of the Muppets, the Henson company back in the day. To see all those things, those two worlds kind of collide, that was kind of cool. And it does also sort of remind you that once upon a time, and maybe still today, I don't know so much with the advent of digital filmmaking, but once upon a time, things like Elstree Studios and things like that, I mean, that was a huge deal, and British filmmaking was really quite highly regarded. So that was kind of neat just to kind of get that little snapshot of how it was back in the 80s.
Those Jim Henson things always were brilliant at the running gag. In the Muppet movie, the running gag was this guy's lost. Maybe you should find Hare Krishna. In this, it was the whole confusion between the frog and the bear. I mean, and they even took it whole next level when Kermit is sitting alone on the bench. And that girl walks by and goes, "Look, Dad, it's a bear." And the guy goes, "No, that's a frog. Bears wear hats." Perfect.
I just like that on the airplane, Gonzo's little crate said whatever.
Yeah, they always referred to Gonzo as the whatever.
I love it. Just the whatever.
They want to buzz room service, and Kermit's like, "I don't think they serve food in 9th class." Some of the humor at the dinner club too. I've told Regina many times that I will find opportunities sometimes to pull lines from movies into regular conversation, and not that I visit anything like the Dubani Club, but I do sometimes think about Kermit opening up the menu and saying, "Well, it just looks like the roast beef is the same price as an Oldsmobile."
Yeah.
I mean, you look at that, just the first 10 minutes, it's almost like, I mean, I'm not devaluing it. I'm just saying at the rate that jokes come just in the first 10 minutes or so is like is like a sitcom.
Just the intro, just when they're going through the credits and Gonzo's like, nobody reads these things anyway. And Kermit's like, I mean, I'm sure they all have families. Like,
yeah.
And I wonder how far you could plummet before you blacked out. And Kermit's like, you really shouldn't do that. And he's like, it sure is tempting, though. What?
You can try it once.
Yeah.
A big part of that humor, too, I think, I think some of that's scripted, and I think clearly some of that's improv, just because the chemistry between Jim Henson and Frank Oz was just unbelievable. You look at some of the video footage that just came out, I think, recently, of the test footage of Kermit and Fozzie just hanging out in real life. They were doing this to test to see how it would look before they made the first Muppet movie, because at first everybody thought it was going to be in the studio. It was going to be a studio thing, kind of like the Muppet Show. And they decided, no, we're gonna have them go out there and actually do a real movie. So they test screened Kermit and Fozzie just riffing, and it's hilarious. And it's just Jim and Frank doing their thing. And when you look at some of those great conversations between not only Kermit and Fozzie, but also Kermit and Piggy, I mean, I just think that stuff is on display. I love the part where Kermit and Piggy have their argument, and it's all about how Piggy's overacting.
Yeah.
And he's like, I know all about your career, Pig. I mean, I think that's one of the things that made it work so well, and why Frank had his role and Jim had his, because the chemistry between those two, whether it's Kermit or Fozzie or Kermit and Piggy, is just so natural, so good, so believable. And I think it's because of them. And you've heard Frank talk sometimes, even recently, about some of the things he's been kind of disappointed with when it came to how new people have approached portraying Kermit and some of the Muppets. He feels that they miss. Well, it's really hard to replicate two people like that.
I think so too. I think there's an element of lightning in a bottle at work here, and but I do think that there are people out there with enough of an appreciation for the Muppets that they could do it justice. It just hasn't quite been done yet.
Yeah, those characters are beloved. They're as inspiring as they were to us watching them. There's other people who not only hold them in the same regard now, but also have the skill set and the criteria to do something with that. And, we're going to see that shortly, because there have been these people who've been trying to get that rebooted in a format that we would want to see for a while now, whether it's, something that does make it to TV or something that doesn't, but, there's people that really want to, hold that torch high like Frank Oz once did and say, look, we can be the stewards of this. Given the regime change at Disney recently, that's exciting to think that, you could have some more of that quality and have that same sort of interplay going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's one thing to be able to have the chops and the talent to be a great Muppet performer. I think it's a whole other thing to be able to be an actor that can sell their interaction with a Muppet on screen.
100%. That is no joke. And that's not something that everybody can do.
No.
Because there's times when I see people struggle even with, CGI acting.
Yeah.
When they were making that movie, there was somebody in a big green suit standing in front of that particular actress, whatever, and you can tell she's not looking at what she's looking at. And you can tell they're talking to an inanimate object or something that's not convincingly real. But I think it speaks to the skill of the puppeteers for bringing the characters to life so well, because I think that gives the actors a lot to work with. But the actors do an incredible job. It's almost seamless. And that's why it's sometimes kind of weird.
As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Charles Grodin is a very unique individual. I mean, incredibly entertaining, incredibly funny, but he's just, there were just only certain people that were going to be able to pull something like this off, because you really believe that Nikki is infatuated with Miss Piggy.
Oh my God, that scene, he's looking deeply into her eyes. And he's like, I'm so sick of tall women with white teeth.
Yeah, he's really intense in that. I had my roommate was watching it with me the other day, and she was pretty disinterested through all of it, but whenever Charles Grodin was on, she was like, who's that? Do I know him? Well, where is he famous? What else has he been in? And I was like, imagine like a really animated Harrison Ford for the 60s and the 70s. That's kind of like Charles Grodin. And then it went straight into the bit where, you know, he's kind of getting kind of a bit forward with Piggy. And she was like, oh, I totally see that. And, you know, he sells it the whole way.
Does.
Like, he's just magnificent in it. Yeah, he's great.
Crazy.
You know?
You can see the lust in his eyes. You're just like, Charles, my God.
You know, the only time I've seen a human actor, if you will, interact with a Muppet like that so convincingly before was growing up watching the Muppet Show. That whenever Mark Hamill was on there on that episode, like he was like super into it, and like, you know, again, everything was like really vivid and dynamic and all the rest of it. And you know, I got so much of that when I was watching this going back. I was like, oh, that's what made that show great. And to be fair, cameos, songs aside, Charles Grodin probably makes that movie really watchable for a lot of people that wouldn't have even given it the time of day, because it's a Muppet movie. Like, he sells it all the way.
Gosh, I will never forget. I mean, you think about, I don't know when that Star Wars episode of The Muppet Show came out, but I mean, as a child, I religiously watched that show. It was must-watch TV. And you can only imagine when you think of the level of passion I have for Star Wars and the Muppets. So I'm sitting there watching, wondering who's on this week. And the show starts, and it's this Scottish Muppet who can gargle Gershwin. And I'm like, what is happening? This doesn't make sense. This is not a typical guest on the show. There's a hole that gets blown through the side of the wall, and out steps my freaking hero. Luke Skywalker steps out, and I'm like, my child head exploded at that point in time. I mean, that's just one of those things that you will never forget, because this is long before, obviously, well before the internet or anything else could have given you a heads up that was going to happen.
Right.
And even Mark Hamill, of course, there was Luke Skywalker and then Luke Skywalker's cousin, Mark Hamill. and the cousin Mark Hamill actually went out there and gargled Gershwin. And I'm like, what is happening? I'm so confused.
I'm just a kid.
Yeah. With that in mind, some of the jokes, some of the lines that were in this movie that made you laugh out loud or chuckle or whatever that stand out to you after just recently watching it?
So for me, I paid more attention to the intro than I ever had, because I haven't seen this since I was very young, so I didn't really understand the concept, I think, the first time I watched it. So I really understood those jokes for the first time. But the one that really surprised me, I remembered it and I knew it was coming, but for some reason it just like really hit differently this time, was when they were in the Happiness Hotel. They're trying to figure out how they're going to help Miss Piggy, and they're all just sort of talking over each other. And then Kermit's like, everybody shut up. And everybody stops talking. And then Janice is still talking. And she's like, if I want to live on the beach and walk around naked. And I don't know why, but for some reason, her just continuing to ramble that time just really, really cracked me up. And then obviously, you know, Sam the Eagle coming in and being my spirit animal and just opening the door and being like, y'all are all weirdos. And then closing the door again, because that's how I feel about all of it. But yeah, I was really surprised by how much Janice made me laugh this time.
That is a running gag with Janice. She does that in, I can't remember if she does it in Muppet Movie, but she does it again in Muppets Take Manhattan.
See, and that's what I think she would do in a fight, is she would just talk somebody to death, or take all of her clothes off and then talk them to death.
I think, as you know, the intro is pretty solid. That breaking the fourth wall thing is cool. I remember I did chuckle out loud whenever they were in the club and Nikki is chatting to Lady Holloway, and she's all like, Nikki, that's my receptionist dancing over there. And he's like, which one? And she's like, the pig. And he's like all starstruck and like, oh my God, like she's sensational. Yeah. And she's like 45 words a minute, about average, you know, just the delivery. Because, you know, and also Diana Rigg, I mean, we didn't really talk too much about her. Anyone who ever saw the original Avengers with her and Patrick McNee knows that Diana Rigg is just like a national treasure, whether she's wearing kinky boots or whether she's, you know, all grown up and aged. Diana Rigg, I mean, just awesome, and just, you know, killed it with that. I loved it.
Yeah, I love it when Diana's going on and on and on about Nikki and all this other stuff, and Piggy just goes, why are you telling me this? She goes, well, it's plot exposition. It has to go somewhere.
It has to, yeah.
Oh, man, I could spend quite a bit of time going through the humor in this thing. The one thing I couldn't remember, I meant to write it down because it's such sophisticated talk. You know, when Kermit and Fozzie are watching the fashion show and Fozzie's just like, well, this is really something. And then Kermit's like, yeah, I liked this, but I was really put off by this. And it was all this fashion terminology. And Fozzie just goes, uh-huh. I wish I could find that, but he goes, yeah, he's literally talking about the fashion of the dress, and Fozzie has no idea what he just said. I love the scene with Beauregard just crazily driving them through London.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole, how come you don't have an English accent? Hey, I'm lucky to have a driver's license. I took that scene and infused it into the dialogue of my fiction podcast, Crimson Files. In the first season of Crimson, Wyatt gets picked up by Jenna for the first time, and Jenna's this hardcore, crazy driver. And at one point in time, she's speeding him to get him to work.
What time do you need to be there?
I need to be in my boss's office by 8 a.m. sharp, and he's on the 4th floor.
Sorry.
What?
I can only take you as far as the front door.
That was a nod to Beauregard saying, I'm sorry, I can only take you as far as the lobby.
You were making Muppet jokes, and I didn't even know it.
I was. For whatever reason, every single time they do the whole pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time, that makes me laugh. Anybody could do that. I bet you I could do it. Pat my head and rub my stomach at the same time. Oh, and I love, if that's the Happiness Hotel, I'd hate to see what the sad one looked like.
Oh, God, yeah.
I gotta say, as we wrap things up, the other thing that was pretty phenomenal about the movie was how they did the whole rescue thing. I mean, you look at how that whole scene plays out. It's funny at first because, you know, they're almost kind of poking fun of the different ways that there might be a heroic scene in this, you know, whether it's Piggy running out of gas and the motorcycle shows up and she looks at the camera and goes, what an unbelievable coincidence. Or when they're all trying to figure out, they're all up on the roof and they're trying to figure out how they're going to get down there. You know, at one point in time, they're like, I think it's Beauregard that says, what if we jump part way? And I just remember as a kid, you know, they're sitting there and they're pulling the top off of that thing and reaching in to get it. And there's that one shot where they look almost up and they're all holding hands and lowering themselves down.
So ridiculous.
That is a crazy ass scene. And I just remember as a kid, it was so awesome, as somebody who likes to see the heroes win, to have that burglar stand there and look at the baseball diamond. And then here comes Fozzie's head. I'm sorry, I don't think that belongs to you. And then it's just hilarious watching these human beings fight these puppets that are just jumping on them and wrestling with them. That was quite a finale that they pulled off for that thing. I mean, as I mentioned, it was written in 1981. I've seen it several times. I can quote several things from it. I love the music and everything. At one point in time, things got so busy, I thought, well, you know, if I'm not able to watch it again, I can probably remember a lot of it. But I was able to watch it, and I gotta say I'm glad I did. It's just every time I watch it, it's enjoyable. It never gets old. I find new things to appreciate, I think, every time I watch it. If you have kids, I hope you've had a chance to show them the two movies that Jim did, Muppet Movie and Muppet Caper. You know, after all these years, it still holds up. Any final thoughts on The Great Muppet Caper?
No, I don't think my final thoughts are going to be able to be better than your final thoughts, but I had a lot of fun watching it.
Yeah, this is a movie you don't watch for the plot necessarily. The plot just serves to just put the Muppets in weird old situations and watch a bunch of actors that you probably love, ham it up with them, and just have a jolly good time. If you like Muppets, you're going to love this one.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show for today, but as promised here in a couple of minutes, if you're interested, you'll be able to hear my 2011 interview with Charles Grodin about The Great Muppet Caper. It was an interview I conducted while I was recording my very first talk show, which was kind of an entertainment talk show. It was still also me as a very newbie podcaster, but had some great opportunities to talk to people on that show, and I'm so glad I can share with you a very memorable and fun conversation with Charles. Before I get to that, I just wanted to remind you that you can find us online at DisneyPlusStreamcast.com or on Twitter at DisneyPlusCast. We are actually going to be back in 2 weeks to discuss Season 2 of The Clone Wars. This is part of our plan to go through the different seasons of the Clone Wars for a variety of reasons, which we'll explain on that show. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. We won't have a show next week, but we will have one in 2 weeks as we discuss Clone Wars Season 2. Thank you so much for listening today, and without further ado, here is my 2011 interview with Charles Grodin. It is my pleasure to welcome Charles Grodin to the Critics Show today. Hi, Charles.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Good grief, the comedian's a bear!
And as I mentioned, it's become a must to have celebrity cameo appearances in Muppet movies, because it's one of the things that fans love about it. However, you were a part of that select few that got a starring role in one of the movies. So my first question for you is, what did it mean to become such a significant part of a Muppet movie?
Well, I always admired the Muppets, and I just had a great relationship with the late Jim Henson and Frank Oz. What I wasn't prepared for really was the relationship that developed between Miss Piggy and me. I know it was romantically, it was written that way. I just did not expect what happened off camera, and I'm being delicate because I'm married. I wasn't married at the time, but I'm being a little careful with what I say. But I just didn't realize that this romantic love interest thing would carry off into I go back to my suite at night, and there'd be a phone call. I don't know. I shouldn't really get into it. Is this a kind of a family podcast type of thing you're doing?
Well, pretty close, but we have the occasional. Well, things
you can use your imagination. I wasn't ready for that. It was. I admitted in one of my books that it was. I can't say it was an indiscretion because I wasn't married, but there were a number of women who thought I was their boyfriend. So in a way, it was an indiscretion.
Very interesting. Well, yeah, I could see how that would come as something that you couldn't possibly be prepared for.
And when they learned who it was, a lot of them were like outraged and baffled because, they just see, this kind of what looks like a short, pig-like woman. But it just caught me off guard. I didn't know what hit me, and suddenly it was a pretty heavy thing there until I got back to New York and went into therapy and everything. But I'm okay now.
So it started as just something you had to play out with Miss Piggy.
Yeah, I thought it was just a love interest in a movie, and then one day it was raining. We were filming a scene outside a castle, and we were just waiting for the rain to stop. They held umbrellas over both of our heads, and suddenly out of really, it was shocking to me. She just kind of turned and looked at me and asked me what I was doing later. Maybe we should change the subject. I don't know where we're going with this. It's memorable, I can tell you that. She's quite something.
Well, you've worked with a number of film directors. What was it like to work with Jim Henson?
Well, I'll tell you something. It was 1990. I was in rehearsal for a play in New York that I was playing the lead in, and I had written. Mm-hmm. And Entertainment Tonight came down to the theater and wanted to interview me about Jim Henson. And when you're the writer and you're playing the leading role, you're really preoccupied.
Sure.
And then the reporter said to me, "Well, he just died," and I didn't know that. The reporter just told me that, and I remember it was my script. I'd written it, and I took it, and I just threw it against the wall, and it was very upsetting. And I have up in my study a very prominently displayed letter from him. Oddly enough, which I received. It might have been that same day that I got that notification by the time I received the letter. So
wow.
It was quite upsetting and dramatic. But, the best directors, you kind of don't even know they're there. They just kind of let you be. Elaine May is like that. Jim was like that. I remember sitting on the set over in London and with a group of us sitting around, and I was talking about how I had directed on Broadway, I had directed off-Broadway, I had directed television specials, but I never wanted to direct a movie because you could almost see the people age right in front of you when the task of directing a movie. And there was a young woman sitting there, and she softly said, she was like an assistant, she said, "My father's a director." And I said, oh really? What's his name? And she said, "Stanley Kubrick."
Oh, what? Yeah, you've heard of him.
Yeah. So I just stopped talking about not wanting to be a director because Jim, a master, obviously Stanley Kubrick, a great master director. Nothing I'd ever want to do. This is a comedy interview about Charles Grodin and Miss Piggy.
That's right. That's
okay,
the subtext. That's the subtext.
At hand.
Yeah, that's the subtext of the whole thing, anyway.
All right.
Okay. Well, the Muppet movie and the Muppet Caper both had bad guys in them. It's interesting because, it can get a little tense for a movie that's it's obviously supposed to appeal to both adults and kids. But, you've got Doc Hopper hires a frog killer, and you're a jewel thief at one point that has the Muppets at gunpoint. It's kind of interesting there that I think what they did is they had Max to kind of lighten things up in the Muppet movie. And I almost get the impression they kind of lightened up Nicky a bit, too, where he's not overly evil or sinister in the film.
Well, I have framed in my study, I have a picture of me holding a gun, and I'm holding a hostage under my left arm.
Yeah, Kermit. Yeah.
Then there's another picture of me looking deeply into the eyes of a woman, and it's Miss Piggy.
That's an awesome picture, I bet. So I would assume that's kind of how they allowed you not to get too sinister, or dark with the role. Because, Nicky's
on meeting me, people get nervous, and, people have seen me only on Johnny Carson or David Letterman.
Yeah.
I recently was talking to someone that I was appearing somewhere, and the journalist admitted that he had great trepidation about speaking to me, not fully being sure whether that was just a comedy bit I was doing on those shows, which of course it always was, but
right.
I committed to it so much that a lot of people wonder, well, wait a minute, is he really kidding? One time I came out on Letterman, and as though I didn't know the camera was on me, I swung around and yelled off into the wings, I was told I'd be paid before I came out here. Well, a lot of people thought I was serious.
But that's what makes great television.
Well, it certainly got people's attention.
I bet it did.
Time that they actually devised a bit where Letterman wasn't going to be there.
Oh.
The idea was that he was going to be home waiting for the his cable appointment. He had the afternoon appointment, and he was actually upstairs in his office. So I come out and take my seat, and there's no one behind the desk. And he's on the monitor explaining the dilemma, the conflict with the cable appointment. And I said, you have a commitment. You're hosting a show. You can't not come because you have a cable appointment. I mean, I always show up, and I carried on, and I said, this is just so unprofessional. Well, there was a lot of mail that came in criticizing me for not being more understanding.
Of course.
You got to be careful what you say.
Well, I always thought that, when it came to this villain role, that the reason why Nicky's kind of a little bit, he's the bad guy, but he's a little bit silly, but he's also able to pull off a jewel heist, that it was a way to kind of make it where he wasn't too sinister or dark for a film that's almost entirely aimed at kids. Is that what they wanted from you, someone who could pull off a bad guy but not go too far?
I do remember that they described the character. I remember this because it was such an interesting way to describe a character as slippery but cute. I thought that was kind of funny.
That is kind of good. You need to write a book about the experience and name it Slippery but Cute.
Slippery but cute. Well, I've written so many books. In fact, my son, when he doesn't see me, I've written 4 memoirs. And
yep.
When my son doesn't see me for 2 weeks, he'll say, "Written any new memoirs?"
Well, now you've got another one.
Oh, my gosh.
I got to ask you something that I know that a lot of people get asked this question when they do these movies, but what was the experience like for you doing scenes with Muppets as opposed to other human beings?
I prefer the Muppets.
Do you?
I got along with all of them. It's easier to work with the Muppets, I would say. It's just as though I saw an ad in the paper recently about that showed a dog that looked unhappy, a local paper, and it was an ad for a pet obedience school, and I said, maybe they ought to look at the owner. And the dog is the dogs are man's best friend. Maybe it's the owner that they have to look at if the dog is giving the owner a hard look, because dogs generally are wonderful. Dogs and kids and Muppets.
And Muppets, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I got to say, you pull off the pig crush very well when you had to do that in character.
It had been the easiest scene I ever played in my life.
Really?
She actually was on my cable show, and there was a reunion there, and it was you could just feel it. Just look at the vibe was there. It didn't go anywhere, and it was, I don't know, it must be 15 years later, because that was in around 96, I think it was, and the movie I think was 1980.
Yeah.
16 years later, that chemistry was still there, no question about it.
So the chemistry came pretty natural. It wasn't awkward or kind of challenging. It just was
all
there.
I actually, it's always been awkward for me with actual, what we know as actual human women. I find that kind of awkward and strange,
Okay.
But Miss Piggy and one or two others I'd rather not mention who aren't actually human women have been maybe the most peaceful romantic relationships in my life.
All right. Well, I do love the scene where you and Kermit are singing about Miss Piggy together, and I assume that is your voice in the song.
I've been asked that. I don't actually remember, but I can tell you it is my voice because. I've sung in public not that long ago. If my wife were sitting here, she'd be just looking at me with a very disapproving look.
Well, it's one of the classic songs for sure. Well, let's talk about the jewel heist scene because it's really kind of funny and amazing when I look at that as to what the set was like that day because you've got the one part, all the Muppets are hanging off the ceiling, working their way down, and then there's times where you see 2 or 3 Muppets grabbing onto you. It's chaotic, it's funny, it's all kinds of things. Can you talk about that day on the set? That had to be a crazy shoot.
Where are we now? This is 2011, and I don't watch myself in movies. I really don't. I just choose not to do that. And so I don't remember. All I really remember is Miss Piggy. I remember Jim. I remember Frank Oz. I remember the girl whose father is Stanley Kubrick. And most of all, I remember Miss Piggy. And but I don't even remember. I don't even remember what happened. I mean, it's all a blur. You spend an evening with Miss Piggy in a suite overlooking all of London, and you just forget everything else. That's just what happens. That's the magic of Miss Piggy. And a lot of people who love the Muppets and love Miss Piggy may not be aware that it's touching some romantic core in them.
Yeah.
And without they love Miss Piggy. But if I were, I would keep an eye for the women out there who may hear this. Keep an eye and don't let your husband watch that movie too many times. Something starts to happen. Suddenly they get a little snappish toward you. Suddenly that same kind of passion isn't there, and you wonder, is your mind elsewhere? And that's what can happen once you're exposed to Miss Piggy. So I don't even remember anything. I don't even remember that I knew there was a jewel heist, but I just basically don't even remember. I don't remember. I just remember who.
Yeah. Well, this is that same scene that's involved in that picture that you've got on the wall where you're holding Kermit with the gun. It was involved in that scene.
I'm sure. I mean, I only know that from the photograph and from Kermit's kind of like, I'll bear with him.
Well, did you get opportunities to watch the Great Muppet Caper with your kids?
I may have. My son is 24 now, so I may have. I don't. I just wouldn't put a movie on. Recently, I'm on the advisory council of the Children's Health Fund in New York. It sends mobile medical health units all over America to poor areas, and somebody offered them a lot of money if I would sit and watch Midnight Run with them. So I'll do that. It's because they're giving a lot of money to the Children's Health Fund, which helps poor people who can't get the medical facilities. But I generally wouldn't watch myself, and even if I wanted to, I wouldn't let my wife catch me doing that, because it would just confirm what she already thinks about me. Can't do that.
Well, so if anything, you've at least been able to pass on the effect Miss Piggy and the Muppet Caper can have on people. You've been able to warn them.
That's for eternity, no question about that.
All right. Well, do people still come up to you and talk to you about Nikki Holiday?
They do. They talk about the Great Muppet Caper, and particularly those with kids do. That and the Beethoven movies are the two that they talk about. And it always makes me feel good. The Beethoven movies are outstanding, as is the Great Muppet Caper. And the Muppet Caper, new Muppet movie, opened very well just now as well.
Yeah, it did. Well, what you mentioned some of the charity work you're doing. What other things are you involved in these days?
I've been an advocate for inmates in prison for about 16 years. It's the main focus of my life, really. I'll give you one example of how odd our justice system is. There's a boy in Florida named Ryan Hawley who's serving life with no chance of parole. He was convicted of robbery and murder, and no one disputes, including the prosecutor, that he was home asleep in bed at the time of the crime. He had no record. It was a party. He went to sleep. He let his roommate his car, which he had done many times before. The roommate and others committed a robbery and a murder, and they should be punished as they are being punished.
Yeah.
But the boy who was home asleep in bed is serving life in prison with no chance of parole. His name's Ryan Hawley, and it's in Tallahassee, and it's about to go in front of a federal court for his last appeal, and it's the felony murder rule. It means if you have anything at all to do with a felony, in this case a robbery, and underlying a murder, you're guilty as the person who killed the person. And
wow.
It's not even credible.
No.
If it was a movie script, I would say that it's really not credible. There are people they let out with violent backgrounds that, frankly, I would never let out.
Yeah.
But when all the people that I've gotten out of prison have been nonviolent, and Ryan Hawley, he was home asleep in bed. Military kid, yes sir, yes ma'am. He writes me from prison. It's a heartbreaking story, and we're just trying to get a case in front of the Supreme Court, because anyone who doesn't think that's cruel and unusual punishment, you'll have to define the words to me.
Well, all the best on that. I mean, that's one of those things where if you don't get something like that under control, who knows what else can come of it.
Well, this is quite a big jump from Miss Piggy, I have to say. This conversation. Miss Piggy would never stand for it.
That's right.
I have to call her.
Focus on that, and then to lighten things back up, go watch The Great Muppet Caper with Charles Grodin and Miss
Piggy.
Piggy.
That's exactly what I do. I just try to keep it light on other fronts because of the heaviness of this subject I just mentioned.
Well, I've enjoyed a lot of your work, and I especially like the character a lot of Nikki Holiday, which was my very favorite Muppet movie. So I know many of our Critic Show listeners enjoyed hearing you talk about it. And Charles Grodin, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you very much.